The hum of the stainless steel dishwasher was the only sound left in the cavernous kitchen, a low mechanical drone that offered Scarlett a fleeting sense of peace. She stood at the edge of the sprawling marble island, a damp microfiber cloth in her hand, methodically wiping away the remnants of what Maya insisted on calling an elevated Sunday dinner. Scarlett, 68 years old, with silver hair braided neatly into a crown and hands that bore the maps of decades of hard work, pressed her weight into the marble. It was cold. Everything in her son's rented 6,000-square-foot Atlanta mansion felt cold. The walls were painted in sterile shades of grage, the furniture prioritized sharp angles over comfort, and the air always smelled faintly of expensive eucalyptus diffusers rather than anything resembling a home. Tonight had been a performance. Maya, wearing a silk slip dress that cost more than Scarlett's first car, had hosted 3 other couples. They were all young, upwardly mobile, and deeply invested in the aesthetics of success. Scarlett had sat at the far end of the long dining table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching her son, Marcus, play the role of the booming restaurateur. He had poured $300 bottles of wine and spoken loudly about profit margins, expansion, and synergy. Scarlett had kept her mouth shut, smiling politely when required. She hadn't mentioned that the collard greens Maya's private chef had prepared were under-seasoned, or that the cornbread was too crumbly, lacking the precise ratio of buttermilk to butter that her own grandmother had perfected. More importantly, Scarlett hadn't mentioned how Marcus was sitting at the head of that table. She scrubbed a stubborn ring of red wine off the marble, her arthritic knuckles aching slightly in the chilled, air-conditioned room. She had built the foundation they were currently dancing on. 3 years ago, when Marcus came to her with a business plan for The Heritage, a restaurant meant to bring authentic, upscale Southern cuisine to the downtown elite, he had been desperate. He had the vision, he said, but no bank would look at him. Scarlett had worked as the financial secretary for the Mount Zion Baptist Church for 35 years. She knew numbers. She knew risk. But she also knew the look in her only son's eyes. When he promised to honor the family's legacy, to put their history on a plate and share it with the world, she had melted. She had cashed out her entire retirement fund, $500,000. When that wasn't enough to secure the prime downtown lease and the custom kitchen equipment, she had done the unthinkable. She signed the paperwork to take out a massive equity loan on the ancestral home. It was a sturdy 4-bedroom brick house in a historic black neighborhood, bought free and clear by her grandfather, who had worked 3 jobs to secure it. The house was her anchor, the place where she had raised Marcus alone after her husband passed. She had risked 3 generations of security to give Marcus his dream. "Mom, leave it. The cleaners come tomorrow morning." Scarlett paused her wiping. She didn't turn around immediately. Marcus was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, loosening his silk tie. His eyes were slightly bloodshot from the wine, and his posture was slouched, the confident executive persona completely discarded now that the guests were gone. "I'm just wiping down the counters, Marcus. Can't stand a sticky counter overnight. It attracts ants," Scarlett said, her voice a calm, rich alto. Marcus let out an exasperated sigh, the kind a teenager gives a nagging parent. "We live in a gated community, Mom. We don't get ants. Just leave it. Maya's already got a headache from hosting, and the smell of the cleaning spray bothers her." Scarlett carefully folded the cloth and draped it over the edge of the deep sink. She rinsed her hands, the cool water rushing over her skin. She didn't remind him that for the first 18 years of his life, she had hosted Sunday dinner for 20 people every week without once complaining of a headache. "I'll take the trash out, then I'll be out of your hair," Scarlett said, drying her hands on a linen towel. "I told you don't need to do that. The landscapers drag the bins to the curb on Mondays." "The bags are full of food scraps, Marcus. It'll smell by morning. It takes 2 minutes." Before he could argue further, Maya's voice drifted down from the upstairs landing, sharp and impatient. "Marcus, did you find the charger or not?" Marcus winced. "Coming, babe. Look, Mom, just lock the deadbolt when you leave. Drive safe." He turned and jogged up the sweeping mahogany staircase, not waiting for a reply. Scarlett stood in the silence for a long moment. She looked at the heavy black trash bag sitting by the pantry door. Maya had ordered the caterers to scrape all the leftovers, beautifully roasted meats, half-eaten artisan breads, and expensive appetizers, straight into the garbage. "I don't do leftovers," Maya had declared to her friends earlier, a statement that had made Scarlett's stomach twist. Scarlett had grown up knowing the exact value of a pound of flour and a whole chicken. Waste was a sin in her house. Here, it was a status symbol. She walked over, grabbed the thick drawstrings of the 2 heaviest bags, and hoisted them up. They were heavy, pulling uncomfortably at her shoulders, but she was a strong woman. She walked out the side door, stepping into the muggy, thick air of the Georgia night. The paved alleyway leading to the massive steel trash receptacles was dimly lit by motion sensor security lights. Crickets chirped in the manicured bushes. Scarlett dragged the bags toward the bins, her mind wandering back to the conversation at the dinner table. Maya had been holding court, swirling her wine glass. The concept of the heritage is really about outgrowing the past, she had told a venture capitalist sitting across from her. We took those heavy, outdated soul food recipes and modernized them, made them chic. Elevated them beyond the sweaty kitchens of the past. The words had been a deliberate surgical strike. Maya knew exactly where those recipes came from. They came from Scarlett's grandmother, a woman who had worked as a domestic cook for decades before finally opening her own small, fiercely beloved diner. Those recipes were a roadmap of survival, written in grease and faded ink in a heavy, leather-bound journal that Scarlett had entrusted to Marcus on the day the heritage opened. It was her most prized possession. Scarlett reached the large, heavy-duty trash bins. She stepped on the pedal, the lid popping open with a squeak. She hoisted the first bag and dropped it in. She grabbed the second bag, the one from the main kitchen prep area. It was awkwardly heavy, bulging at the side. As she lifted it over the rim of the bin, the cheap plastic snagged on a sharp piece of metal jutting from the bin's hinge. With a loud, ugly tearing sound, the side of the bag split open. Scarlett gasped and stepped back as half the contents spilled onto the immaculate concrete driveway. Coffee grounds, slimy oyster shells, wilted salad greens, and congealed sauce splattered across her sensible leather loafers. "Lord have mercy," she muttered, frustrated. She looked around for a broom, knowing there wouldn't be one outside. She would have to pick the larger pieces up by hand. She crouched down, her knees popping in the quiet night, and began scooping the wet debris back into the torn bag. The smell of rotting seafood and stale coffee hit her nose, making her eyes water. She reached into a pile of wet, oily paper towels. Beneath them, her fingers brushed against something hard, something heavy. It wasn't a plate or a discarded container. It had the distinct texture of cracked, worn leather. Scarlett froze. The motion sensor light above flickered slightly, casting long, stark shadows across the concrete. Her heart executed a slow, heavy thump against her ribs. Slowly, she pulled the object from the mess. Coffee grounds and congealed gravy clung to it, but there was no mistaking the intricate tooling on the cover or the frayed, gold-tasseled bookmark hanging limply from the bottom. It was the journal. Her grandmother's recipe book. Scarlett knelt there on the cold concrete, the heavy book resting in her palms. The air in her lungs seemed to vanish. This book had survived the Great Depression. It had survived house fires and floods. It held the handwriting of a woman born in 1890, detailing the exact measurements of spices, the secrets to curing meats, the prayers whispered over boiling pots. She had given it to Marcus. He had sworn to keep it in the custom-built glass display case in his office at the restaurant. "The heart of our business, Mom," he had said, looking her right in the eye. And now it was here, in the trash, mixed with oyster shells and garbage. A physical wave of nausea washed over Scarlett. Her hands, usually so steady, began to tremble. She didn't feel rage, not yet. What she felt was a profound, suffocating grief, a sudden and violent shattering of the illusion she had maintained for 3 years. She stood up slowly, clutching the ruined book to her chest, indifferent to the grease staining her blouse. She kicked the torn garbage bag into the bin, let the lid slam shut, and walked back toward the house. Her steps were completely silent. She bypassed the side door and walked around to the back patio, entering through the sliding glass doors into the darkened sunroom. She needed light, but she didn't want to alert Marcus and Maya upstairs. She moved to the small utility sink in the laundry room, flipping on the dim overhead fluorescent bulb. Scarlett set the book gently on the edge of the sink. She took a clean, damp cloth and began to meticulously wipe away the grime. The leather cover had protected most of the interior, but the edges of the pages were soaked in dark, oily stains. As she carefully opened the cover to assess the damage, the book naturally fell open to the middle, the binding broken. Tucked neatly between the recipe for buttermilk biscuits and smothered pork chops, there were papers. They weren't old, yellowed recipe cards. They were crisp, bright white printer paper, folded into thirds. Scarlett frowned. Her grandmother never kept loose papers in the book. She set the cloth down, wiped her hands on her slacks, and pulled the folded papers out. The first page was a glossy trifold brochure that had been printed from a computer. The header featured a pixelated generic stock photo of an elderly woman staring blankly out a window. Shady Pines Transitional Care, a state-funded facility for the elderly. Scarlett stared at the words. State-funded. She knew what that meant. In her years working at the church, she had visited parishioners in places like that. They were the underfunded, understaffed warehouses where families dumped the elderly when they ran out of money or patience. They smelled of bleach and urine. They were places where people went to be forgotten. Why would this be tucked inside her family's most sacred heirloom? She unfolded the second piece of paper. It was an email printout. The font was small, but Scarlett's vision was sharp. From Maya_W@theheritage.com to Marcus_CEO@theheritage.com. Date Thursday, April 2nd, 2026. Subject, the house and the plan. Babe, we need to finalize this before the appraisal next week. I cannot deal with the delays anymore. The buyers are getting anxious about the commercial zoning transfer. I toured Shady Pines today. It's depressing as hell, but it's covered by her Medicare and the state bracket, which means zero out of pocket for us once we liquidate her assets. You need to get her to sign the final medical proxy forms this weekend. Tell her it's for her life insurance policy updates or whatever you told her last time. I am not bringing this up again, Marcus. The restaurant is bleeding cash, my credit cards are maxed, and I am not moving out of this house. If the restaurant sale doesn't go through because her name is still tied to the deed of that old shack, I swear I'm taking the kids and leaving. She's taking up space we can't afford. Besides, she's starting to smell like old people and mothballs. I don't want her around my friends tonight. Just get the signature. Throw out that filthy old recipe book while you're at it. It's taking up room in the home office and it stinks of grease. Scarlett read the email. Then she read it again. The words did not blur. She did not cry. The trembling in her hands stopped completely, replaced by a terrifying absolute stillness. Liquidate her assets. That old shack. Taking up space. Every sacrifice she had ever made flashed before her eyes. The nights she stayed up balancing the church ledgers to earn overtime. The years she wore shoes with holes in the soles so Marcus could have the latest basketball sneakers. The terrifying moment she handed over the deed to the house her grandfather had bled for, trusting her son to build a legacy. They weren't just careless. They were actively plotting her destruction. Marcus hadn't just failed at business. He had allowed his wife to hollow him out, turning him into a man willing to forge and manipulate to throw his own mother into a state-run facility to save his rented mansion and luxury lifestyle. Scarlett looked down at her grandmother's recipe book. The grease stains on the edges of the pages suddenly didn't look like garbage. They looked like battle scars. For 68 years, Scarlett had been a woman of faith, a woman of patience, a woman who believed in turning the other cheek and sacrificing for family. She had been soft, yielding and accommodating, wrapping her strength in maternal warmth so as not to intimidate the men in her life. She carefully folded the email and the nursing home brochure, sliding them securely into her leather purse. She picked up the damp, ruined recipe book and held it tightly against her side. She turned off the laundry room light. Standing in the darkness, looking toward the hallway that led to the grand staircase, Scarlett felt a fundamental shift within her soul. The loving, self-sacrificing mother who had walked into this house 3 hours ago was dead. Maya and Marcus had just murdered her. The woman walking out the back door into the humid Georgia night was someone else entirely. She was the financial manager who had kept a struggling church afloat during 2 recessions. She was the granddaughter of a woman who had built a business with nothing but flour, grit, and a cast-iron skillet. She was Scarlett. And she still held the keys to the kingdom. They thought she was just an old woman who smelled of mothballs, a stepping stone they could easily crush on their way up. They were about to learn a very brutal lesson in finance, and a much harder lesson in respect. Scarlett walked to her 10-year-old sedan, unlocked the door, and placed the recipe book gently on the passenger seat. She started the engine, the headlights piercing the darkness of the gated driveway. She didn't speed away. She drove exactly the speed limit, her mind already calculating interest rates, analyzing the fine print of the bank guarantees she had signed, and formulating a plan that would dismantle Marcus's fraudulent empire brick by rented brick. The storm was coming, and Scarlett was going to be the one bringing the thunder. The sun had not yet risen when Scarlett sat down at the heavy oak dining table in her own home. The house, a sturdy two-story brick craftsman in the historic West End of Atlanta, was wrapped in the profound, comforting silence she had cultivated over 40 years. The floorboards beneath her slippered feet were original, laid down by her grandfather, a man who had worked the graveyard shift at the rail yard so his descendants would never have to pay rent to a landlord. Every corner of this house smelled of lemon oil, old paper, and the faint, sweet ghost of her late husband's pipe tobacco. It was a sanctuary. But this morning the air felt suffocating, as if a stranger were breathing in the room with her. Scarlett did not bother making breakfast. She brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, black and bitter, and set her laptop on the table. Beside it, she placed the ruined, grease-stained leather recipe book she had rescued from her son's garbage just hours ago. She opened the laptop. The screen cast a cold, blue glow over her face, highlighting the deep lines around her mouth that had settled into a hard, unforgiving set. Marcus had made a fatal miscalculation. Like many people of his generation, he assumed that because Scarlett was 68, she was technologically obsolete. He thought her expertise was limited to the paper ledgers and dusty filing cabinets of the Mount Zion Baptist Church. He didn't realize that when the church transitioned to cloud-based accounting 10 years ago, Scarlett had been the one to take the certification courses, mastering QuickBooks, data encryption, and digital forensic tracking. When Marcus had opened the Heritage, he had set up a shared administrative cloud drive. He had given Scarlett a login just in case, likely assuming she would never figure out how to use the two-factor authentication. She logged in now. The password was the year her grandmother was born. The irony tasted like copper in her mouth. Scarlett bypassed the front-facing dashboards, the colorful pie charts that Marcus used to impress investors, and went straight into the raw data. She opened the general ledger for the past 24 months. Row after row of numbers populated the screen. To an untrained eye, it was a blur of digits. To Scarlett, it was a narrative as clear as a printed book. She began the audit. At first glance, the restaurant was generating impressive revenue. The Heritage was fully booked most weekends, pulling in roughly $150,000 a month in gross sales. But as Scarlett traced the outflow, the story quickly turned grotesque. The expenses were bleeding the business dry, and they had nothing to do with food costs or staff wages. In fact, Scarlett noticed that the primary meat supplier had placed the restaurant on a cash-on-delivery hold due to 60 days of unpaid invoices. 2 of the senior line cooks had their paychecks bounce last month, categorized under a vague bank error note in the system. Where was the money going? Scarlett cross-referenced the vendor payouts with the outgoing wire transfers. Her jaw tightened as she found the first major leak, a recurring monthly payment of $12,000 to a vendor listed as MW Aesthetic Consulting. MW Maya Williams. Scarlett clicked into the digitized receipts attached to the vendor profile. Maya wasn't consulting. She was running her personal lifestyle through the restaurant's corporate account. There were receipts for ambient dining decor that perfectly matched the price of the Italian leather sectional currently sitting in Marcus's rented mansion. There was a $4,000 charge for marketing and networking hospitality, a luxury spa weekend in Sedona for Maya and 3 of her friends. Then came the vehicles. The lease for the sleek, slate-gray Porsche Cayenne Marcus drove was buried under logistics and delivery vehicles, pulling another $2,500 a month. They were treating the restaurant's operating account like an endless ATM, but the math didn't add up. With $150,000 in revenue and nearly $190,000 in operating costs and lifestyle siphoning, the business was operating at a massive monthly deficit. They should have been bankrupt 8 months ago. The bank should have frozen the accounts. How were the lights still on? Scarlett leaned back, resting her hands on her lap. The coffee in her mug had gone ice cold. To sustain this level of hemorrhaging, there had to be a massive hidden injection of capital. She navigated away from the restaurant's internal software and opened a new browser tab, logging directly into the regional bank where the primary business accounts were held. Because she was still listed as the original co-signer on the initial startup loan, she retained view-only access to the corporate profile. She scrolled through the deposit history, going back week by week, month by month. There it was, exactly 3 months ago, in mid-January. A lump sum wire deposit of $350,000. The origin of the wire was a title escrow company. Scarlett felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest, a physical manifestation of dread. An escrow company only wires that kind of money for real estate transactions. Marcus didn't own any real estate. He rented the mansion. He leased the restaurant space. The only real estate tied to Marcus's name was the original collateral agreement. Her home. Scarlett's hands began to tremble. She closed the bank tab and opened the Fulton County Clerk of Superior Court's Public Records database. Her fingers felt stiff, almost paralyzed, as she typed her own name and the parcel identification number of her property into the search bar. The database loaded. A list of recorded deeds appeared. The first was the original warranty deed from 1952, bearing her grandfather's name. The second was the transfer deed to her after her father passed. The third was the initial equity line of credit she had willingly taken out to help Marcus start the restaurant. And then there was a fourth document, recorded on January 14th of this year. Deed to secure debt. Amount, $350,000. Borrower, the Heritage LLC. Guarantor, Scarlett Hamilton. "No," Scarlett whispered into the empty room. No. She clicked on the PDF icon to view the scanned document. It was a secondary mortgage, a predatory loan with a brutal 12% interest rate, secured entirely by the remaining equity in her home. The document required the homeowner's signature. She scrolled down to the last page. There on the signature line was a signature, but it wasn't hers. It was Marcus's signature, followed by the letters POA, Power of Attorney. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. Late December. Scarlett had been bedridden with a severe bout of bronchitis. She had been exhausted, coughing until her ribs ached, heavily medicated on prescription cough syrup. Marcus had stopped by, playing the role of the devoted son. He had brought soup, fluffed her pillows, and casually pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase. "Mom, the restaurant's health insurance policy requires an update for all co-signers. It's just standard medical proxy and supplementary coverage stuff. I know you feel awful, but the broker needs it by 5 today. Just sign on the sticky notes." She had trusted him. Why wouldn't she? He was her flesh and blood. She had signed where he pointed, barely able to keep her eyes open, wanting nothing more than to go back to sleep. He hadn't brought her medical proxy forms. He had brought a durable financial power of attorney. He had legally authorized himself to act on her behalf, and 3 weeks later, he had used that stolen power to pledge the roof over her head to a high-risk private lender just to fund his wife's shopping sprees and his own sinking ship. Scarlett pushed away from the table. She couldn't breathe. She walked into the hallway, staring at the framed black-and-white photographs lining the walls. Her grandfather standing proudly on the porch the day he paid off the original mortgage. Her mother in the front yard planting the oak tree that now shaded the driveway. Marcus had sold their blood, their sweat, and their history. If the Heritage failed, and it was failing spectacularly, the private lender wouldn't go after Marcus's rented mansion. They would foreclose on her. The state would take her home, and she would have absolutely nothing. Maya's email from the trash bin echoed in her mind. Once we liquidate her assets, Shady Pines is covered by the state bracket. They had engineered her ruin. They had dug her grave, and they were just waiting for her to fall in. Scarlett walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but the tears that had threatened to fall were gone. In their place was a terrifying clarity. She marched back to the laptop. She wasn't done yet. Maya's email had mentioned buyers and a commercial zoning transfer. If Marcus was bleeding out, what was his end game? She dove back into the restaurant's cloud drive. She ignored the financial spreadsheets and went straight to the correspondence and legal folders. She searched the keywords acquisition, buyout, and letter of intent. For 20 minutes, she found nothing but vendor disputes. Then she noticed a subfolder buried inside Marcus's personal directory, innocuously labeled Q3 Projections. She opened it. Inside was a single 40-page PDF titled Asset Purchase Agreement, Omnicorp Dining Group and the Heritage LLC. Scarlett opened the document and began to read, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had audited contracts for 3 decades. Omnicorp Dining Group, a massive national conglomerate known for buying up regional restaurant concepts and turning them into sterile franchised chains, had made a cash offer to purchase the intellectual property, branding, and recipes of the Heritage. The purchase price was $2 million. But it was an asset purchase, not an entity purchase. Scarlett understood the distinction perfectly. Omnicorp was buying the brand and the recipes, her grandmother's recipes. They were not assuming any of the LLC's debts. According to the contract terms, once the $2 million was wired to Marcus, he intended to dissolve the Heritage LLC entirely. The structure of the betrayal was masterful in its cruelty. When the LLC dissolved, the predatory $350,000 loan would immediately default. Because Scarlett's home was the collateral, the lender would initiate foreclosure proceedings against her. Marcus and Maya, meanwhile, would walk away with $2 million in clean cash, unburdened by the restaurant's debts, unburdened by the house, and by putting her in a state-funded facility, unburdened by her. They would be rich. She would be homeless and institutionalized. And the recipes her grandmother had bled for would be printed on laminated menus in airport terminals across the country. Scarlett closed the laptop. The quiet of the house was no longer suffocating. It was expectant. The walls seemed to wait for her command. She picked up the grease-stained recipe book. She traced the embossed lettering on the cover. "Not today," Scarlett whispered to the empty room. "Not my house. Not my name." She did not call Marcus. She did not scream into the phone demanding an explanation. To confront him now would be to show her hand, to give him time to accelerate the sale or hide the money. Instead, Scarlett reached for her cell phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in 5 years. Arthur Vance. Arthur was a senior partner at one of Atlanta's most ruthless corporate litigation firms. He was also a deacon at Mount Zion. 30 years ago, Scarlett had discovered a discrepancy in the church's building fund that saved Arthur from a federal embezzlement frame-up orchestrated by a corrupt contractor. Arthur had always told her, "Scarlett, you ever need the earth scorched, you just give me the coordinates." She pressed the call button. It was 6:15 a.m. Arthur answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Arthur," Scarlett said, her voice smooth and cold as river stones. "It's Scarlett Hamilton." "Scarlett? Good Lord, woman, it's barely dawn. Is everything all right?" "No, Arthur, it is not." Scarlett looked out of the window, watching the first light of dawn break over the oak tree her mother had planted. "I need to freeze an asset. I need to revoke a durable power of attorney. And I need to financially disembowel a corporate entity before Friday." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The sleep completely vanished from Arthur's voice. "Who are we hunting, Scarlett?" "My son," she replied, her tone devoid of any maternal warmth. "I'll be at your office at 8 sharp. Have your paralegal pull the title deed for my house and draft an emergency injunction to block an asset purchase agreement." "I'll have the coffee ready," Arthur said quietly. Scarlett hung up the phone. She walked into her bedroom, bypassed her soft Sunday dresses, and pulled out a sharply tailored charcoal gray pantsuit she hadn't worn since she retired. She pinned her silver hair back with severe precision. Marcus and Maya had mistaken her love for weakness, her silence for ignorance. They had played a dangerous game of chess, assuming they were playing against a pawn. They didn't realize they had just threatened the queen on her own board. And Scarlett was about to clear the table. Arthur Vance's office on the 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise smelled of lemon polish and expensive aged paper. Unlike the modern glass-walled fishbowls of younger attorneys, Arthur's domain was encased in heavy mahogany and soundproofed walls. It was a room built for keeping secrets and dismantling empires. Scarlett sat in a high-backed leather chair, her posture impeccably straight, her charcoal gray suit radiating a formidable, unyielding energy. Across the desk, Arthur, a man who had spent 40 years carving up corporate entities, stared at the documents she had laid out before him. The silence in the room stretched for several long minutes, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a brass grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur slowly took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the forged power of attorney, the predatory mortgage deed, and finally, the printed email from Maya regarding the Shady Pines nursing home. "I have seen a lot of depravity in my career, Scarlett," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I have seen brothers sue each other into bankruptcy. I have seen children hide assets while their parents were on life support. But this is a special breed of malice. He mortgaged the roof over your head to fund a lifestyle he can't afford, and he's planning to lock you in a state ward to cover his tracks." "Can we stop the sale to Omnicorp?" Scarlett asked. Her voice was perfectly level. There were no tears left to shed. The fire of betrayal had baked her grief into something hard and sharp as obsidian. Arthur leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "We aren't just going to stop the sale, Scarlett. We are going to obliterate his entire financial infrastructure." He pulled a legal pad toward him and began writing with aggressive, heavy strokes of his fountain pen. "First, the power of attorney. I am filing a formal revocation of the POA with the county clerk immediately. I am also sending a certified notice of fraud to the private lender who issued that $350,000 mortgage. Because your signature was forged, that deed is contested. They won't be able to foreclose on your house, but the moment they realize the collateral is fraudulent, they will immediately call the loan due in full from the Heritage LLC. Marcus will have 30 days to produce $350,000 in cash, or they will force the business into receivership." Scarlett nodded slowly. "And the Omnicorp buyout?" "Omnicorp is buying the intellectual property, your grandmother's recipes, and the restaurant's branding. They are assuming no debts," Arthur explained. "I will file a cease and desist and an emergency injunction against the sale, citing a dispute over the ownership of the IP. You gave Marcus physical possession of the recipe book, but you never transferred the copyright of the family's intellectual property. Once Omnicorp's legal department gets wind of a messy, litigious IP dispute tied to a fraudulent mortgage, they will run for the hills. Corporate buyers hate messy titles. The $2 million will vanish into thin air." "Do it," Scarlett commanded. Arthur looked at her carefully. "Scarlett, I need you to understand the gravity of this. Once I file these motions, the dominoes will fall incredibly fast. The bank will freeze the corporate accounts pending the fraud investigation. His credit lines will snap shut. The vendors will come collecting. In less than 72 hours, Marcus will be financially ruined. There is no turning back from this. Are you prepared to do this to your own son?" Scarlett looked at the crumpled Shady Pines brochure resting on the mahogany desk. She thought of Maya's words. "She's taking up space we can't afford." She thought of her grandmother's journal sitting in a trash bag among oyster shells. "My son died when he signed my name to that mortgage," Scarlett said, her eyes deadlocked with Arthur's. "The man living in that rented mansion is a thief. Burn it down, Arthur. Burn it all to the ground." Sunday afternoon arrived with a stifling, humid heat that settled over Atlanta like a heavy blanket. Inside her West End home, Scarlett moved through her kitchen with the practiced rhythmic grace of a master conductor. The air was thick with the rich, intoxicating aromas of her heritage. Skillets sizzled with perfectly golden fried chicken. A massive cast-iron pot bubbled with collard greens, smoked turkey necks, and the precise, unwritten dash of apple cider vinegar that her grandmother had perfected a century ago. It was Sunday dinner, but today the feast was not a peace offering. It was a final testament to everything Marcus was about to lose. At 4 o'clock, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway broke the quiet. Scarlett wiped her hands on her pristine white apron and walked into the dining room. The heavy oak table was set for 4. For her 2 grandchildren, 8-year-old Leo and 6-year-old Chloe, she had set out her good, everyday ceramic plates. But at the 2 seats designated for Marcus and Maya, there were no plates. There was no silverware. Instead, resting perfectly centered on their placemats, were 2 thick brown manila envelopes. The front door opened. The chaotic energy of the young family spilled into the quiet hallway. "Don't touch the walls, Leo. Your hands are sticky," Maya's voice snapped, sharp and irritated. Scarlett watched them step into the foyer. Maya was wearing a designer linen jumpsuit, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, her expression caught somewhere between boredom and disdain. She looked around the historic home as if she were touring a museum she had been forced to visit. Marcus trailed behind, carrying a cheap bottle of wine, a stark contrast to the $300 bottles he poured at his own house. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes dark and pronounced. The stress of the failing restaurant and the pending Omnicorp deal was clearly eating him alive. "Grandma!" Chloe squealed, running down the hall and throwing her arms around Scarlett's waist. For a fraction of a second, the ice around Scarlett's heart thawed. She stroked the little girl's braided hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo. "Hello, my sweet girl. Hello, Leo. Wash your hands, both of you. Dinner is ready." As the children scurried to the bathroom, Marcus walked up to her, offering a tight, forced smile. "Hey, Mom. Smells good in here. Sorry we're a little late. Traffic on the connector was a nightmare." "Traffic is always a nightmare, Marcus," Scarlett said evenly. "Have a seat." Maya sighed loudly, crossing her arms. Scarlett, we can't stay long. We have a networking cocktail hour at 7. Can we just eat? I'm starving and this neighborhood always makes me nervous after dark. Scarlett didn't flinch at the insult. She simply gestured toward the dining room. Take your seats. Marcus and Maya walked into the dining room and stopped. They looked at the table. Mom? Marcus frowned, pointing at his placemat. Did you forget to set plates for us? Sit down, Marcus, Scarlett said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried a low baritone authority that demanded immediate compliance. Uneasy, Marcus pulled out his chair and sat. Maya hesitated, her eyes narrowing behind her sunglasses, before she slowly took the seat beside him. The children ran back into the room, oblivious to the sudden, suffocating tension. Scarlett moved to the kitchen and returned carrying 2 heaping plates of food, crispy chicken, macaroni and cheese, and bright greens. She placed them gently in front of Leo and Chloe. Eat up, babies, Scarlett said softly. Grandma made this just for you. She then took her seat at the head of the table. She looked at her son and her daughter-in-law, her hands folded neatly on the polished wood. What is this, Scarlett? Maya demanded, tapping her manicured fingernail against the thick manila envelope in front of her. Are we playing a game? Open it, Scarlett said. Marcus picked up his envelope. He flipped the metal clasp and pulled out the stack of papers. The first page was the bank ledger detailing Maya's monthly $12,000 consulting withdrawals. The second page was the $350,000 deed to secure debt on Scarlett's home. The third page was the glossy Shady Pines nursing home brochure. The final page was the printed email Maya had sent regarding the old shack and liquidating her assets. Scarlett watched Marcus's face. It was a masterclass in the anatomy of panic. The color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickening, ashen gray. His eyes darted frantically across the pages, his breathing suddenly shallow and ragged. His hands began to shake so violently that the papers rattled against the oak table. Mom, Marcus choked out, the word barely a whisper. Mom, how did you get this? Maya, noticing her husband's collapse, snatched the papers from his hands. As her eyes scanned her own email, her mouth dropped open in shock. You went through our trash? Maya shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical octave. You dug through our garbage like a stray dog? That is an invasion of privacy. I can sue you for this. Quiet, Scarlett commanded. The word cracked through the room like a bullwhip. Maya snapped her mouth shut, genuinely startled. The children stopped eating, looking up with wide, frightened eyes. Leo, Chloe, Scarlett said, her voice instantly softening into honey as she looked at her grandchildren. Take your plates into the living room and turn on the television. Grandma needs to have a grown-up conversation. The kids, sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere, quickly grabbed their plates and scurried out of the room. The moment the television flickered on in the distance, Scarlett turned her gaze back to the 2 adults. The warmth vanished entirely. You will not raise your voice in my house, Maya, Scarlett said, her tone cold and precise. You will not speak unless I ask you a question. And the only question I have for you is how you plan to pay for that linen jumpsuit when your credit cards are declined tomorrow morning. Maya scoffed, trying to regain her arrogant footing. You're crazy. You don't control my finances. As of 8 o'clock Friday morning, I control everything, Scarlett replied. She turned her attention to her son, who was staring at the forged mortgage deed as if it were a venomous snake. Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Marcus? Did you really think you could pledge the house your great-grandfather bled for, the house that sheltered you your entire life, to a predatory lender just to keep your wife in luxury spas? Mom, you don't understand, Marcus pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. The confident CEO facade was gone, replaced by the desperate, cowardly boy he had become. The restaurant was struggling. I was trying to protect you. If I asked for more money, you would have said no. I just needed a bridge loan. The Omnicorp deal is going to close next week. I was going to pay off the mortgage. I swear to God. I was going to fix it. By putting me in a state-funded facility? Scarlett asked, tapping her finger against the Shady Pines brochure. By throwing away your grandmother's recipe book into the garbage with the oyster shells. You were going to fix it by erasing me. Marcus sobbed, burying his face in his hands. That was Maya's idea. I told her no, Mom. I swear I didn't want to do that. Don't put this on me, Maya yelled, pointing an accusing finger at Marcus. You're the one who forged the signature. You're the one who ran the business into the ground trying to look like a big shot. You're a fraud, Marcus. Enough. Scarlett's voice boomed, silencing them both. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes drilling into her son. I don't care whose idea it was. You both signed my death warrant, but you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated the woman who raised you. Scarlett pulled a final piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the table. This is a copy of the legal injunction filed yesterday afternoon, Scarlett said, watching their eyes widen in horror. I have officially revoked the power of attorney. I have notified the private lender of the forgery, and my attorney has filed a cease and desist with Omnicorp regarding the sale of my intellectual property. Marcus gasped, clutching his chest as if he had been shot. No, Mom, no. If you block Omnicorp, the deal falls through. If the lender knows about the forgery, they'll call the loan. They'll force me into bankruptcy. The restaurant, everything will be gone. Everything is already gone, Marcus, Scarlett said, her voice devoid of pity. You lost it the moment you decided my life was an acceptable casualty for your ambition. Without my matching funds, the bank has already flagged your accounts. Your credit is frozen. Your business is dead. Maya stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Her face was twisted in a mixture of panic and pure rage. You evil, vindictive old witch! You're destroying your own son. You're making your grandchildren homeless. My grandchildren will never be homeless, Scarlett countered, her glare pinning Maya to the spot. My doors will always be open to Leo and Chloe. But you two? You are nothing to me now. You are strangers who tried to rob me. Scarlett stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her suit. She looked down at the two broken people sitting at her table. There was no joy in this victory. There was only the solemn, heavy execution of justice. Leave your house keys on the table, Scarlett ordered. Marcus looked up, tears streaming down his face, his hands trembling violently. Mom, please, where are we supposed to go? I don't have access to the cash. We can't pay the rent on the house. Please, I'm your son. My son knew the value of hard work and honesty. I don't know who you are, Scarlett said, turning her back to them. She walked toward the hallway, her steps measured and calm. Leave the keys, collect your children, and get out of my house. If you ever try to forge my name or contact my bank again, I will not call my lawyer. I will call the police, and I will watch them put you in handcuffs. She didn't look back. Scarlett walked into her bedroom and closed the door, listening as the muffled sounds of Maya's hysterical sobbing and Marcus's desperate apologies echoed through the house, followed finally by the heavy, definitive slam of the front door. The storm had broken. The house was quiet once more. Scarlett walked over to her dresser, opened the top drawer, and took out her grandmother's grease-stained recipe book. She held it tightly against her chest, the leather rough and real against her skin, as she prepared for the long, hard road of rebuilding the legacy they had tried to destroy. The implosion of a fabricated life does not happen in slow motion. It happens with the brutal, blinding speed of a car crash. At 10:15 a.m. on Monday morning, Maya was standing at the polished glass counter of a high-end boutique in Buckhead. She had fled the oppressive tension of the rented mansion, seeking the familiar narcotic comfort of retail therapy. On the counter sat a pair of designer leather boots and a silk scarf, totaling $1,400. She handed the clerk her platinum corporate credit card with a practiced flick of the wrist. The clerk swiped it. The machine chimed a sharp, discordant note. Declined. The clerk offered a practiced, apologetic smile. I'm sorry, ma'am. It seems there's a hold. Would you like to try another card? Maya's face flushed. Run it again. The machine is glitching. That account has a $50,000 limit. The clerk complied. The machine chimed again. Declined. Account frozen. Contact issuer. Maya snatched the card back, her hands trembling, and pulled out her personal gold card. Swiped. Declined. A cold sweat broke out across her neck. She grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus, her perfectly manicured nails tapping frantically against the glass counter. Across town, Marcus wasn't answering his phone. He was sprinting through the heavy glass doors of the Heritage. He had arrived at the restaurant to find his staff clustered near the valet stand, whispering and pointing. A heavy-duty flatbed tow truck was parked diagonally across the reserved VIP spaces. Thick steel chains were already secured around the axles of his slate-gray Porsche Cayenne. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Marcus shouted, his voice cracking as he jogged toward the truck. Drop the car! The tow truck operator, a burly man in a high-visibility vest, didn't even flinch. He pulled a clipboard from his truck cab. "Marcus Williams?" "Yes. That's my vehicle. Put it down." The operator handed him a carbon copy sheet. "Not anymore, buddy. Capital Auto Finance issued an immediate repossession order at 8 a.m. Your account has been flagged for fraudulent collateral linkages. Bank orders. Have a nice day." The hydraulic winch whined, lifting the rear wheels of the luxury SUV off the pavement. Marcus stood frozen on the asphalt, the Georgia sun beating down on his back, realizing that the entire foundation of his reality had just evaporated into thin air. His mother hadn't just cut him off. She had surgically dismantled him. 48 hours later, Scarlett was in her backyard, kneeling in the rich, dark soil of her vegetable garden. She was tying up the heavy vines of her heirloom tomatoes, the smell of damp earth and crushed green leaves filling the air. It was grounded, honest work. The squeak of the front gate broke her concentration. A young man in a cheap windbreaker walked up the driveway, holding a thick manila envelope. "Scarlett Hamilton?" he asked. Scarlett stood up, brushing the dirt from the knees of her denim overalls. "I am." "You've been served," he said, handing her the envelope before quickly turning on his heel and walking away. Scarlett didn't rush. She walked up the steps to her porch, sat in her wicker rocking chair, and peeled open the flap. She pulled out a stack of legal documents bearing the seal of the Fulton County Probate Court. Emergency petition for conservatorship and guardianship. Petitioner, Marcus Williams. Respondent, Scarlett Hamilton. She read through the filing. Marcus and Maya had hired a bottom-feeding litigation attorney to argue that Scarlett had suffered a sudden and severe cognitive break. The petition claimed she was experiencing acute paranoia and dementia, evidenced by her irrational and erratic destruction of her son's stable business and her delusional claims of forgery. They were asking the court to declare her legally incompetent and grant Marcus immediate total control over her estate, medical decisions, and finances. It was the ultimate, desperate strike of a cornered animal. If they could get a judge to declare her insane, they could invalidate Arthur Vance's injunction, unfreeze the bank accounts, push the Omnicorp sale through, and still put her in Shady Pines. Scarlett pulled her cell phone from her pocket and dialed Arthur. "I have the petition right in front of me," Arthur said before she even said hello. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Scarlett, this is malicious litigation. They found a doctor willing to sign a preliminary affidavit based solely on Marcus's description of your behavior. They're aiming for an ex parte emergency hearing this Friday." "Can they win?" Scarlett asked, her voice calm, devoid of the panic her son was surely hoping to incite. "Only if you don't show up," Arthur replied. "Wear your best suit, Scarlett. We are going to court." Friday morning, the Fulton County Courthouse was a hive of nervous energy. Inside courtroom 4B, the air conditioning hummed loudly, doing little to cut the heavy tension. Marcus sat at the petitioner's table, wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked like it hadn't been pressed. Maya sat in the gallery right behind him, holding a crumpled tissue, playing the role of the distraught, long-suffering daughter-in-law to perfection. Scarlett sat beside Arthur Vance at the respondent's table. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, a string of simple pearls, and an expression of absolute, unshakable stone. She did not look at her son. Judge Eleanor Vance, a stern woman with 30 years on the bench, peered over her reading glasses at the courtroom. "Let's get this over with. Mr. Gable, you're representing the petitioner. You are asking this court to strip a 68-year-old woman of her autonomy. You better have a mountain of evidence." Marcus's attorney, a slick man with too much hair gel, stood up. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case. My client's mother, Mrs. Hamilton, has unfortunately succumbed to severe dementia-induced paranoia. Out of nowhere, she fabricated wild claims of forgery, unlawfully froze the accounts of a thriving restaurant, and jeopardized a multi-million-dollar corporate buyout. She is a danger to her own estate. We have an affidavit from Dr. Aris stating that her erratic, punitive behavior aligns with late-stage cognitive decline." Judge Vance looked at the affidavit, unimpressed. "A doctor who has never examined her in person. I see. Mr. Vance, does your client have a response?" Arthur stood up smoothly, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, my client is not only of sound mind, but she possesses a financial acumen that frankly puts the petitioner to shame. We do not need a doctor's note to prove her lucidity. Mrs. Hamilton will testify to her own mental state." Arthur gestured to Scarlett. She stood, walked confidently to the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth, her voice echoing clearly off the wood-paneled walls. Arthur approached the podium. Mrs. Hamilton, your son claims you erratically destroyed his thriving business due to paranoia. Could you please explain to the court the financial reality of the Heritage LLC? Scarlett adjusted the microphone. When she spoke, there was no tremor of age, no hesitation. There was only the lethal precision of an auditor. The Heritage LLC was not thriving, Your Honor. It was bleeding to death, Scarlett stated. She didn't look at notes. The numbers were burned into her mind. In the last fiscal quarter, the restaurant grossed $450,000. However, the operating expenses, padded by fraudulent personal withdrawals, exceeded $570,000. The petitioner was siphoning an average of $12,000 a month to a fake consulting firm registered to his wife, Maya Williams. They defaulted on their primary vendor account 60 days ago. Marcus sank lower in his chair. The judge raised an eyebrow, her pen pausing over her legal pad. If they were operating at a deficit, how did the business stay afloat? Arthur prompted. By stealing from me, Scarlett answered smoothly. On January 14th, my son used a forged medical power of attorney, which he slipped into a stack of insurance papers while I was bedridden with bronchitis, to secure a predatory secondary mortgage on my home. The principal was $350,000 at a 12% interest rate. He used the equity of my ancestral home to float his wife's credit card bills. Objection! Marcus's lawyer shouted, his face turning red. Hearsay! These are the exact paranoid delusions we are talking about in the petition. They are not delusions, Mr. Gable. They are banking records, Arthur shot back, pulling a thick binder from his table and handing it to the bailiff. Your Honor, Exhibit A, the complete forensic accounting of the Heritage LLC, cross-referenced with the fraudulent loan documents and IP addresses proving the transfers originated from the petitioner's personal laptop. The judge took the binder, flipping through the meticulously highlighted pages. The silence in the courtroom grew suffocating. Marcus suddenly stood up, unable to contain his panic. She's lying. She's trying to ruin me because she's old and jealous. Your Honor, I had a buyer. Omnicorp Dining Group was offering $2 million for the restaurant next week. A failing business doesn't get a $2 million buyout. She filed an insane injunction to kill the deal just to spite me. Judge Vance slammed her gavel down. Mr. Williams, sit down and close your mouth, or I will hold you in contempt. Marcus collapsed into his chair, breathing heavily. Arthur Vance smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. Your Honor, the petitioner brings up the Omnicorp buyout. He claims my client's delusional injunction is the only reason the deal isn't closing. I would like to submit Exhibit B to the court. Arthur pulled a single sealed document from his briefcase. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. What is this, Mr. Vance? The judge asked. That is a sworn, notarized affidavit from Mr. Elias Thorne, the Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Omnicorp Dining Group, Arthur explained, his voice ringing through the room. Mr. Thorne also happens to be the head deacon at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where my client served as financial secretary for 35 years. Marcus's head snapped up. The remaining color drained from his face. He hadn't known. In all his arrogant networking, he had never bothered to learn who sat on the board of the corporate giant he was trying to sell to. Arthur continued. When my client informed me of the impending asset sale, I made a phone call to Mr. Thorne. I suggested Omnicorp look very closely at the chain of title regarding the intellectual property and the collateral debt. They did. Judge Vance read the affidavit aloud, her voice dripping with disdain. Upon internal review of the undisclosed liabilities and the contested intellectual property rights held by the Heritage LLC, Omnicorp Dining Group is withdrawing its letter of intent entirely. The buyout is canceled, effective immediately, citing gross misrepresentation of assets by the seller, Marcus Williams. Maya let out a choked gasp from the gallery. Marcus buried his face in his hands. The illusion was dead. The lifeline was cut. Judge Vance closed the folder and took off her glasses. She looked down at Marcus's attorney. Mr. Gable, I suggest you withdraw this petition before I sanction you for bringing a frivolous and malicious filing into my courtroom. The slimy lawyer quickly gathered his papers. Petition withdrawn, Your Honor. The judge turned her gaze to Scarlett. The severity in her eyes softened just a fraction. Mrs. Hamilton, your testimony is clear, concise, and frankly, brilliant. You are in full command of your faculties. You are excused." Then Judge Vance looked at Marcus. The hammer fell. "Mr. Williams, you came into this court attempting to use the law as a weapon to institutionalize your own mother, all to cover up your gross financial negligence. Not only is this petition denied with extreme prejudice, but I am taking the liberty of forwarding the transcript of this hearing, along with Exhibit A, directly to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for the White Collar Crime Division. Forgery and wire fraud are serious felonies. I suggest you find a very good criminal defense attorney. We are adjourned." The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Scarlett stepped down from the witness stand. She didn't gloat. She didn't look at Maya, who was now weeping openly in the gallery, realizing that her designer lifestyle had just evaporated into potential prison time for her husband. Scarlett simply picked up her purse and walked out the heavy oak doors with Arthur Vance by her side. As they stepped into the marble hallway of the courthouse, Marcus burst through the doors behind them, his face frantic. "Mom, wait," he begged, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Mom, please, you have to talk to the DA. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. They'll arrest me, Mom." Scarlett stopped, but she didn't turn around. Before Marcus could take another step toward her, a man in a rumpled suit stepped out from an alcove by the elevators. He walked directly up to Marcus. "Marcus Williams?" the man asked. Marcus blinked, disoriented. "Yes?" The man slapped a thick, tape-bound envelope against Marcus's chest. "Notice of foreclosure and commercial eviction for the Heritage LLC. The lender has called the loan. The locks on the restaurant are being changed as we speak. You have 72 hours to clear your personal property from the premises." The process server walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the middle of the courthouse hallway, holding the heavy envelope. His knees buckled slightly. The $2 million was gone. The restaurant was gone. The cars were gone. And the district attorney was coming for him. Scarlett finally turned to look at him. She looked at the terrified, broken man who had once tried to throw her away like an old, grease-stained book. "You wanted to outgrow the past, Marcus," Scarlett said, her voice echoing coldly in the marble corridor. "Now you have absolutely no future." She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened with a soft chime. Scarlett stepped inside, the doors sliding shut, leaving her son standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. August in Atlanta is unforgiving. The heat radiates off the asphalt in shimmering waves, thick and heavy enough to press the breath right out of your lungs. For Maya Williams, the heat was a constant, suffocating companion. She stood behind register number 4 at a discount grocery store on Buford Highway, the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights overhead casting sickly shadows under her eyes. She was wearing a stiff polyester maroon vest over a cheap white t-shirt. Her name tag, crooked and smudged, dug slightly into her collarbone. "That's $24.16, Maya said, her voice flat, devoid of the vibrant, condescending lilt it used to possess at high society cocktail parties. The customer, a tired-looking woman with a crying toddler, swiped an EBT card. Maya bagged the generic brand cereal and canned beans with hands that were dry and cracked. The acrylic nails she used to spend $200 a month to maintain were long gone, replaced by chipped, brittle fingernails cut close to the quick to prevent them from snapping on the cardboard boxes she had to haul from the stockroom. Her shift ended at 4 in the afternoon. She clocked out, her feet throbbing in cheap canvas sneakers, and walked out into the blinding Georgia sun to wait for the public bus. The slate-gray Porsche was a ghost of a memory. 3 months had passed since the gavel fell in Judge Vance's courtroom. 90 days of a brutal, uncompromising freefall. When the bank foreclosed on the Heritage LLC, they didn't just take the restaurant. They liquidated everything tied to Marcus's name to recoup the fraudulent debt. The rented mansion in Buckhead was vacated in 48 hours. The designer furniture, the silk slip dresses, the luxury watches, all seized or sold at pawn shops for pennies on the dollar just to pay the retainer for a criminal defense attorney. Because Judge Vance had kept her word, the district attorney's office had opened a file on the forged power of attorney. Marcus was facing up to 5 years in state prison. The bus dropped Maya off 3 blocks from their new reality, a cramped, poorly ventilated 2-bedroom apartment in a complex where the paint was peeling and the security gate had been broken for a decade. She walked up the concrete stairs to the 2nd floor, the smell of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage lingering in the breezeway. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Marcus was sitting at a chipped Formica dining table, staring blankly at a stack of final notice utility bills. He was wearing faded work jeans and a gray t-shirt stained with grease. His hands, once soft and manicured for shaking hands with venture capitalists, were calloused and blistered. With a pending felony fraud investigation hanging over his head, no corporate office or bank would even look at his resume. He had spent the last 2 months working the loading docks at a freight logistics center, pulling pallets of frozen meat for $14 an hour. He looked up as Maya dropped her purse on the counter. The silence between them was no longer filled with accusations or screaming matches. The rage had burned itself out, leaving only the hollow, echoing reality of consequence. "Did you talk to the lawyer?" Maya asked, rubbing her aching temples. Marcus rubbed his face with his rough hands. "Yeah, the DA is offering a plea deal. If I pay full restitution to the private lender, $350,000, they'll reduce the felony to a misdemeanor and give me 5 years of probation. No jail time." Maya let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. $350,000? We don't even have $350 for the electric bill, Marcus. What are we going to do? Before Marcus could answer, a sharp knock echoed at the thin wooden door. Marcus stood up, his shoulders tense. He opened it. Standing in the breezeway was not a bill collector, but a uniformed courier. "Marcus Williams?" the courier asked, holding out an iPad. "Signature required." Marcus signed the screen with a trembling finger and took the thick, familiar-looking manila envelope. He closed the door and walked back to the table, staring at the return address. Arthur Vance, Esquire Senior Partner. "What is it?" Maya asked, her breath catching in her throat. "Is it a lawsuit? Is she suing us for the rest?" Marcus tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a formal summons, drafted in Arthur's precise legal language. "Mr. Williams, you are hereby requested to attend a settlement meeting regarding the outstanding debts and intellectual property of the dissolved entity previously known as the Heritage LLC. Attendance is mandatory to discuss the terms of your potential criminal restitution. The meeting will take place tomorrow at 9 a.m. at the commercial property located at 410 West Peachtree Street." Maya grabbed the letter, her eyes scanning the address. "West Peachtree. Marcus, that's the restaurant. That's the Heritage. Why would they want to meet there? The bank locked it up." Marcus stared at the paper, a sickening mix of dread and a tiny, pathetic spark of hope igniting in his chest. "I don't know, but if Arthur Vance is offering a settlement for the restitution, we have to go." The next morning, the Atlanta sky was overcast, threatening a late summer downpour. Marcus and Maya stood on the sidewalk outside the glass-fronted commercial space that used to be their empire. The gold leaf lettering of the Heritage had been scraped off the windows, leaving faint, ghostly outlines on the glass. The heavy mahogany doors were unlocked. They pushed inside. The space had been stripped of its pretentious aesthetic consulting decor. The expensive Italian leather booths were gone. The velvet curtains were gone. The room was bright, echoing, and painfully empty, save for a large plain oak table sitting dead center in the main dining room. Sitting at the head of that table was Scarlett. She was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, looking like the absolute monarch of an undisputed territory. Arthur Vance sat to her right, his briefcase open, several thick files fanned out before him. "Sit down," Scarlett said. Her voice was calm, carrying effortlessly across the empty room. Marcus and Maya walked forward slowly, pulling out 2 metal folding chairs across from Scarlett. They looked like reprimanded schoolchildren sitting before a headmaster. "I'll get straight to the point," Arthur Vance began, leaning forward. "The bank put the commercial lease, the kitchen equipment, and the outstanding debt of this property up for auction last week to clear the books. As you know, Marcus, you owe a restitution of $350,000 to avoid a felony conviction." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yes, sir." "Well," Arthur said, adjusting his glasses, "the debt has been paid." Maya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with sudden, desperate hope. She looked at Scarlett. You paid it? Scarlett, did you bail us out?" Scarlett looked at Maya, her expression completely unreadable. "I did not bail you out, Maya. I eliminated a liability." Arthur cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hamilton purchased the commercial lease and paid the restitution in full. She is now the sole proprietor of this commercial space and all assets within it. Furthermore, Mrs. Hamilton has used her leverage with the district attorney's office to secure a deferred prosecution agreement for you, Marcus. Tears of relief welled up in Marcus's eyes. He covered his face with his rough hands, letting out a ragged sob. Mom, thank you. Thank you. I don't know what to say. I swear to God I'll make it right. We can reopen. I can manage the front of house. We can get the old menu back. Stop talking, Marcus, Scarlett commanded. The sharp edge in her voice cut his sobbing short. Scarlett folded her hands on the table. You misunderstand the nature of this meeting. You are not reopening anything. You are not a manager. You are not an owner. You have forfeited the right to lead. She pulled a thick, leather-bound folder from Arthur's stack and slid it across the table toward Marcus. Open it and read the title, Scarlett instructed. Marcus opened the folder. The legal heading at the top of the first page was printed in bold, undeniable ink. The Hamilton Family Irrevocable Trust. Beneficiaries, Leo Williams and Chloe Williams. Trustee, Scarlett Hamilton. I didn't buy this property for you, Scarlett said, her eyes boring into her son. I bought it to protect the legacy you tried to sell. I have placed the commercial lease, the kitchen equipment, and my grandmother's intellectual property, her recipes, into an irrevocable trust. It belongs to your children. They will inherit it when they turn 25. Maya stared at the document, the blood draining from her face. An irrevocable trust? That means you can't undo it. We have no access to it. Exactly, Arthur Vance chimed in, a hint of satisfaction in his gravelly voice. It is legally impenetrable. Creditors cannot touch it. And more importantly, neither can you. I am turning this space into a community dining hall and catering business, Scarlett continued, her tone strictly business. Honest food, fair prices, serving the neighborhood, not the elite. It will generate a steady income, which will go directly into a locked educational fund for Leo and Chloe. Marcus looked at his mother, the reality of her brilliant, ruthless maneuver settling over him. She had saved him from prison, yes, but she had permanently stripped him of his crown. She had bypassed his generation entirely to protect the next. So why are we here? Maya asked, her voice trembling, a mix of humiliation and lingering defiance. If this is all for the kids, why did you summon us? Scarlett leaned back in her chair. Because the district attorney's deferred prosecution agreement comes with a contingency. To avoid jail time, Marcus, you must maintain steady, verified employment for the duration of your 5-year probation. And as a convicted fraudster, you are finding it very difficult to secure employment. Marcus looked down at his calloused hands. Yes, ma'am. I am offering you a job, Scarlett said. Marcus looked up, a glimmer of confusion in his eyes. The kitchen opens at 5 a.m. for prep, Scarlett stated, her voice as hard as the marble countertops she used to clean in his mansion. You will be the dishwasher and the junior prep cook. You will scrub the pots, you will mop the floors, and you will peel the potatoes. You will be paid the Georgia state minimum wage. Maya, you will be the front-of-house cleaner and server. You will wipe down the tables and serve the food. Maya gasped, recoiling as if she had been slapped. Minimum wage? Scrubbing floors? Scarlett, I have a degree. I can't be a waitress. How are we supposed to live on minimum wage? You will live exactly how millions of hardworking people in this country live, Scarlett replied, her gaze unflinching. You will budget. You will clip coupons. You will take the bus. You will learn the true value of $1, because it will be the first time in your lives you have actually bled to earn one. Mom, please, Marcus whispered, the humiliation complete. Dishwasher? My friends, the people I used to do business with, they come to this area. Then they will see what a man looks like when he finally takes responsibility for his actions, Scarlett said, entirely devoid of pity. That is the offer. You work for your children's trust under my supervision, at the bottom of the ladder. If you refuse, Arthur will notify the DA that the settlement is void, and they will proceed with the felony charges on Monday morning. Scarlett stood up, smoothing the front of her navy suit. She looked down at the two broken, humbled people who had once thought they could discard her. You have 2 minutes to decide, she said. She didn't need to wait. The silence in the room was the sound of total surrender. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out a cheap ballpoint pen, and signed the employment contract Arthur slid toward him. His hand was shaking, but he signed. Maya, weeping silently, her pride completely shattered, took the pen and did the same. 3 weeks later, the West Peachtree space was unrecognizable. The sterile, pretentious atmosphere of the Heritage had been scrubbed clean. In its place was the Foundation, a brightly lit, welcoming dining hall that smelled of smoked paprika, slow-roasted pork, and fresh buttermilk biscuits. The sounds of old soul music played softly from the speakers, mingling with the genuine laughter of local families enjoying an affordable, incredible meal. The kitchen was a symphony of organized chaos. At the massive stainless steel prep island, Scarlett stood wearing a spotless white apron. Beside her stood 8-year-old Leo, standing on a sturdy plastic stool so he could reach the counter. "Now, Leo," Scarlett said, her voice warm and rich, filled with the maternal love that had never truly vanished, only redirected. "The secret to the biscuit isn't the butter. It's the buttermilk. And you don't overwork the dough. You have to treat it gently. Watch." She guided the boy's small, flour-dusted hands as he pressed the metal cutter into the soft dough. Resting on a wooden reading stand at the corner of the prep island, safe from the flour and grease, was her grandmother's leather-bound recipe book. The water stains and the cracked binding were still there, but it was no longer a piece of garbage. It was a holy text, open and revered. Through the small rectangular window of the swinging kitchen door, Scarlett caught a glimpse of the dining room. Maya was clearing a table. She was wearing a simple uniform polo shirt and sensible non-slip black shoes. A customer handed her a $5 tip. Maya looked at the crumpled bill, her expression tight, before whispering a quiet, "Thank you, sir," and putting it in her apron pocket. Behind Scarlett, the heavy spray of the industrial dish pit hissed loudly. Marcus stood up to his elbows in hot, soapy water. He was wearing a heavy rubber apron over a sweat-soaked t-shirt. He grabbed a massive cast-iron skillet, his muscles straining as he scrubbed the baked-on grease with a wire brush. He didn't look up. He didn't complain. He just worked. Scarlett watched her son for a long moment. There was no joy in seeing him perform manual labor, but there was a profound, quiet peace in knowing that the poison of entitlement had been drained from his system. He was no longer a CEO playing with fake money. He was a man earning his keep. "Grandma, look!" Leo proudly pointed to a perfect row of raw biscuits on the baking sheet. Scarlett smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She kissed the top of her grandson's head. "Beautiful, baby," she said softly. "Just beautiful. You keep practicing like that, and one day, all of this will be yours." She turned back to the flour, her hands moving with the steady, unbreakable rhythm of generations. The storm had passed. The dead wood had been burned away. And in the soil of accountability, a new legacy was finally taking root.